Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Adrian Joyce here. I'm the Secretary General of EuroACE and absolutely delighted to host and moderate this webinar this afternoon. We're going to look at something that's dear to our hearts, which is the place of buildings in the Fit for 55 package of proposals that have been published by the European Commission and that are now at the negotiation stage in the European Parliament and the European Council. Next slide. Just a quick introduction on the instructions. If you have questions, and I hope you do, please put them in the question and answer box and we will monitor them and they will be posed to the panelists after the opening statements of each panelist. Next slide. For those that don't know us, EuroACE Energy Efficient Buildings is an industry association based here in Brussels. We were formed in 1998 and we have 15 company members who are the leading manufacturers of products, equipment and services that go together to make highly energy performing buildings. We work only on high-level policy issues and that towards the EU institutions with the intention of developing coherent policy and legislative frameworks that affect buildings and that will lead to multiple benefits for all across the EU. Next slide. Those companies are here. Many of them you will see are household names across all of our member states. Next slide. We know that improving energy efficiency in buildings, especially at these trying times in a context of major geopolitical upheaval and post-COVID pandemic, is really the best and most cost-effective way of achieving some of the key objectives of the European Union and our own personal objectives. Just listing some: creating employment and securing economic growth, alleviating energy poverty over the long term, not by short-term measures, achieving energy security, an issue that's gone right back up the agenda since the tragic events have unfolded in the Ukraine, providing people with comfortable and healthy homes, indeed workplaces and other buildings, and meeting our carbon reduction targets. Next slide. In our work, we have established already more than 10 years ago the Renovate Europe campaign. So it has continued to beat the drum for high ambition among policymakers, among member states, to put this crucial issue of energy performance of buildings high on the agenda. The campaign has 49 partners, including 18 national level partners. We have 38 champions from the European Parliament and others from business and communities. And we will continue to work to help now that the what is known, we will help with the how to achieve what we are looking for. So today we're going to talk about buildings in the Fit for 55 package. And I'm delighted to have a very high-level panel with me. Brian and I will introduce them in just a moment. But first of all, I wanted to let you know that we have launched today, in conjunction with this webinar, an infographic that unfolds the place of buildings in the Fit for 55 package. You see an image of it here on the right, and it's available for download on our website. So I invite you to look at it afterwards. What you see, next slide, zooming in, yeah, next slide, Guy, is working from the bottom up. Next slide, because it will bring in the indications to the, thank you. We have the legislation listed across the bottom at the foot of each of the 5 buildings that we have put into the infographic. You see in the center, the one that takes most of our attention, the EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and flanking that, the Renewables Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive to the left, and to the right, the ETS2 and the Social Climate Fund as elements of the Fit for 55 package. And when you read our infographic, and it's aimed at policymakers and those who work in the Fit for 55 negotiation space. You work up from the left where you see the themes, for example, increasing the rate of energy renovations, increasing the depth of energy renovations. And then working across, we see where relevant articles appear in whichever of the pieces of legislation cover that theme. And if you, by looking at this, then we hope you will get an appreciation of how important it is that there's coherence across these different elements of the legislative package that is known as the Fit for 55. Next slide. So today's agenda, I've hinted at already, is an exchange with an extremely expert and high-level panel. We're going to hear a keynote speech in just a moment from Brian Motherway, who's head of the Energy Efficiency Division at the International Energy Agency. And the panel discussion, which I will then moderate, will see Paulo Rey Garcia, Deputy Head of Unit at the European Commission, Kieran Cuff, who is the rapporteur for the EPBD. He's Irish from the Green Party, and he will be followed by Arianna Vitali, the Secretary General of the Coalition for Energy Savings, and finally we'll have Femke de Jong from the European Climate Foundation. And then I will animate a discussion following their opening statements and pose your questions to them before we have a wrap up from our President, Céline Carré. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Brian Motherway and to pass the floor to you, Brian, for a 10 to 12 minute presentation. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Adrian, and greetings everyone, and thanks for the invitation to join you. And I'm very pleased to be among many friends speaking on the panel today, and also with the audience across Europe. Looking forward to today's discussion. And it comes at a very timely moment, so I'm very happy to share some global perspectives that might help set the scene for where we are. There's an old saying in the kind of nature community that says the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago, but the second best time to plant a tree is today. And I feel sometimes that applies to energy efficiency, where we see that countries who have been working on energy efficiency policies for the longest find themselves reaping the benefits from that. And I think we can all admit that if we had been stronger in energy efficiency in the previous decades, some of the challenges we are facing today would be that bit easier. Let me give you an example. We published some research recently looking at appliances, showing that those jurisdictions with the longest track record in energy efficiency standards for appliances, which includes the EU, but also US and Japan, now find that the typical appliance uses literally half the electricity that it would have otherwise used, and yet the appliances cost actually less to buy. So we see consumers benefiting, energy systems benefiting, and of course the environment benefiting. So we see the urgent case for stronger action on energy efficiency. Next slide, please, Gifra. Where are we now? We're not on track. After a perturbed year in 2020 for many reasons, we saw that global progress on efficiency measured as energy intensity returned to the 10-year average, which is we improved by about 2%. Improvement is better than nothing, but it's literally half what it needs to be this decade if we're to be on track for our net zero targets according to the IEA net zero scenario. So I want to make 2 points here. We need to double the rate of progress globally on energy efficiency, and we need to do so quickly. Secondly, this decade is crucial. Energy efficiency is front-loaded in the net zero pathway because it's cheaper, more available, and more ready to act than many of the other actions we're going to have to take this and in further decades. Equally, starting with energy efficiency brings a number of benefits. Primarily, it makes the rest of the net zero project cheaper, more feasible, and easier to deliver. It makes our investment requirements in solar less onerous, in grids less onerous, in infrastructure less onerous. Everything we do by constraining the size of the global energy system through efficiency means the whole net zero project becomes easier and cheaper. Equally, compared to some of the actions we need to think about and how they affect citizens and how we bring communities with us on the net zero pathway, energy efficiency offers a number of immediate benefits to all of us as citizens and consumers, whether it's lower bills, more comfortable homes, more pleasant commutes, less polluted cities, and of course slowing down climate change. So it's a way that we can all be involved in very positive multiple benefit actions towards the net zero goal, and that's why certainly here in the IEA we call for an early focus, particularly at the start of the net zero pathway that we now find ourselves on, that energy efficiency needs to lead and needs to lead quickly. That's the net zero context. But of course, as Adrian has said, we're in a particular context now due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in the next slide, I can just say that if you take a short-term focus on energy saving, some of you may have seen that the IEA has been advising governments around the world, not least in Europe, on some of the actions that we can either take at a governmental level or us as individuals and consumers towards reducing our energy dependence on Russia immediately. If we think about the transport sector, especially as we head towards the driving season in the summer, we know there are many things we can do, ranging from driving more economically to using public transport more, favouring trains over flights for short distances, working from home more, all of these actions. And then equally, if we start to look towards next winter and the gas demand, which will rise very dramatically in Europe as it does every winter, we know there are many short-term actions such as changing the thermostat level in your home, to the deeper, stronger actions, which equally can start now around speeding up our retrofit, investing more in heat pumps, investing more in insulation in homes, in buildings, in the public sector, and of course all the efficiency measures that apply in transport and in industry as well. So we know there's an awful lot that can be done now, and it all speaks towards the same goal. And really what I want to stress today in my remarks is the alignment of shorter and long-term goals, because our governments, our energy ministers, our decision makers are thinking towards the here and now, as they should be. How can we save energy immediately? How can we start moving away from our dependence on Russian gas and oil as quickly as possible? How can we help consumers with there's a very severe pain they're feeling right now in terms of higher energy bills and less affordability of energy? We shouldn't underestimate the challenges that energy poverty entails this coming season. And we know there are many short-term actions, but they align really well, if done properly, with the medium and longer-term goals. So we know that we can start with behaviour change campaigns, as many European countries have already done, that look at the immediate daily actions, but also encourage investment in insulation, investment in heat pumps, and moving towards more efficient equipment and infrastructure. And similarly, across a range of measures. What speaks to today speaks to tomorrow. And we need to make sure that we're looking at very full alignment with these short-term goals. This is not a crisis that's going to go away. This is a very deep global energy crisis of the kind we haven't faced for decades. And we need to understand that in terms of high prices, price volatility, concerns about supply of energy, pressures on demand and affordability, this is the era we now live in, and governments need to adjust their thinking to understand that alignment of short-term pressures with the long-term goals. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has created a humanitarian crisis, and that has led to an energy crisis of global implications. But we still very much live today in a climate crisis, and it behoves us all to work together to move towards solving these crises together in a unified and aligned way. And of course, energy efficiency speaks to all of these measures in a way that many other sectors don't, and can create opportunities for affordable and deliverable interventions that address all of these imperatives. Next slide, please, Kiefer. Before I close, I just want to tell you that as well as today's discussion, there are many discussions going on, as you know, about these issues. And I want to say to you that in just 1 month's time, we will hold our 7th annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency, this year hosted kindly by the government of Denmark. And it takes place in the city of Sønderborg in southern Denmark, which is a real leading city for innovation in energy efficiency and clean energy. And I'm very pleased to say that it's going to be our biggest and most significant gathering ever on energy efficiency. We've over 25 energy and climate ministers coming from every continent to discuss immediate action to accelerate energy efficiency progress. There's going to be a very strong focus on action, on early action, and how governments can learn from each other and work together to accelerate progress. You can find out much more about this conference on our website, which I give you the link to there. And of course, if you want to find out more, if you want to see if you're able to join us, by all means, please get in touch with me directly. So, Adrian, let me leave it there. Looking forward to the discussion and very grateful to be part of this conversation today.
Brian, thank you so much for setting the context, a moment of gravity, I would say, as well as a moment of crisis. And those remarks that you've made on energy efficiency and its role that it can play are truly incisive, and I hope inspirational to the audience for them to come forward with questions for a little later in our session. So I will now turn to the panel. And let's just all put our cameras on, the panelists, and we'll leave the slide in place because I think maybe one or two of our panelists, their camera isn't working, unfortunately. So welcome formally. And if I could, I would like to start by inviting Paolo Rey Garcia from the European Commission to give us a statement, 2 or 3 minutes, Paolo. And we've suggested that maybe it would be interesting to understand how the Commission sees the place of the Buildings Directive within the Fit for 55 package. So Paolo, for a couple of minutes, an opening statement.
Yes, thank you very much, Adrian and colleagues. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. And well, good afternoon to all and of course to the audience. And first, my apologies because for some reason the computer connection did not work out, so I'm joining through my mobile. Hence the lack of camera because it doesn't work through this means. But if you can hear me, I will do my best to communicate without the camera on. So on the reasoning behind the EPBD proposal and really how it fits within the overall Fit for 55 package, a starting point, of course, last year was truly on the climate crisis. So the EPBD recast proposal that we put forward in December is a central piece of this package and of its building-related elements, which are quite many and quite important ones. But if we look at the context today, just a couple of months later, it is really equally relevant to the current energy crisis. Because let us not forget that buildings are in fact responsible for 45% of the energy consumed, for a large part of greenhouse gas emissions. And this becomes even more relevant with the current context of the Russia-Ukraine aggression. So in fact, in the EU, heating and cooling and domestic hot water as well account for 80% of the energy that households consume. So the centrality to the current energy crisis is very, very telling, I would say. So if we look then into a bit the key objectives and zooming into what we have in the EPBD, as regards the climate target focus, we really have a very central attention to increasing the climate ambition as part of the Green Deal. So the reasoning for the proposal had two key objectives. On the one hand, to deliver on the, let's say, 2050 decarbonisation objectives, but really a pathway along 2030 and 2040 up to 2050. And then on the other hand, to make a really significant contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, of those coming from buildings and being building related, but similarly on reducing final energy consumption by 2030. So this last link is also very important because it's a direct and very relevant contribution not only to the greenhouse gas targets, but also to the final energy consumption targets. And in this regard, the attention was very much put on regulatory strengthening for boosting renovation on the one hand, so really to addressing the big potential that we have in existing buildings, and then on developing a new vision for the building sector, so towards decarbonization, moving away from fossil fuels, and fostering renewable energy in buildings. So the proposal, to give a bit of fuller picture, puts also a lot of focus, a really central focus on energy poverty, on worst performing buildings. This is also a common thread to different proposals of the Fit for 55 package, attention on healthy homes, and also on healthy buildings more largely, being public buildings, schools, hospitals, I mean really across the board. And then it also pays quite particular attention on the phasing out of fossil fuels. We can say that a number of provisions already in December were very much, let's say, anticipating somehow what is the situation today. So we have very important hooks in the proposal to phasing out fossil fuels from heating. And then we also think that the provisions that we have on the phasing out also of subsidies for those fossil fuel boilers are even more important today than they were already very important in December. Moving then to a last point from my side, as regards the overall architecture of the Fit for 55 package from the Commission side on the proposals as they were adopted by the Commission, there was a lot of focus and a lot of thinking into ensuring consistency across all the proposals. If I to mention briefly a bit how the different pieces fit together, with the EPBD we set up the overall vision for new and for existing buildings in the Fit for 55 package, so that the EPBD will also contribute, of course, to the delivery of the overall energy efficiency targets in the Energy Efficiency Directive. Then, on the other hand, the provisions on zero-emission buildings will enable the indicative targets for the share of renewables in buildings in line with the Renewable Energy Directive to be more easily fulfilled. And the EPBD proposal would also, with the replacement of inefficient fossil fuel boilers by systems with no direct emissions, such as heat pumps, but also the renewable-based technologies, similarly contribute to the objectives that we have across the package. We have, of course, a strong synergy with the price signal in the proposed extension of ETS to buildings, and then with the provisions on e-mobility in the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, which are fully complementary to what we have on e-mobility in the EPBD. I would not want to take much more time, but of course there is a strong link to the Social Climate Fund, to the effort sharing regulation. So all these different bits and pieces on building related provisions were very much coordinated with the EPBD proposal. And of course, looking now back into the repower, let's say, context and the upcoming package and their preparation, is very important to see that investments into energy efficiency are really flagged as smart investments, because this would allow us not only to have a short-term focus, but to really stimulate already today the investments into insulation, heat pumps, other measures that in the medium and long term will deliver a more resilient system. That is really very, very important in the current context. So this would be a bit my initial thoughts, but very much looking forward to the conversation and to the panel debate and questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
And thank you too, Paula. In fact, you've verbally given a great picture of what we hope our infographic captures, because I know that not too many people have that picture in their minds about how these different pieces of legislation interact. And Kieran, you were listening attentively, and you have quite a responsibility on your shoulders as the rapporteur for the EPBD in the Parliament. And we thought we'd just ask you, what are your chief concerns about the EPBD? And as rapporteur, have you been also looking across these legislative instruments to see where those coherences or incoherences exist? And maybe you can, 2 or 3 minutes and give us an opening statement on how the work's going.
Sure. Well, the wonderful thing about the European Parliament is it's not uniquely my responsibility. It's a shared responsibility between myself and the shadow rapporteurs. And I'm delighted to have a very progressive group of MEPs from across the political spectrum working on this file. Svetlana Penkova from Bulgaria, Morten Helveg Petersen from Denmark, and my own compatriot Sean Kelly. So it is a great group of people working on this. And I think Brian and Paula have really spelt out the challenges that we face. It's interesting, having sort of been in this space for a long time, that the kind of the issues come and go, but some really remain the same. I mean, we were obsessing a bit about peak oil 15 years ago, and we realized there was more oil than we need. But energy security was very much in the frame over the last 20 years, and obviously it burst in under the spotlight with Putin's murderous war in Ukraine. But I guess the long run issue is tackling climate change, and that is really what we can do. And it's really good to see energy efficiency coming up the priority list. Of course, we need the renewables, and of course, we have to ramp up our ambition there. But energy efficiency, the megawatts, can really deliver a huge amount of what we're looking for. So look, decarbonising the building stock, realistically, it needs to happen before 2050 if we're to halt the advance of climate change. And there's 5 areas that I really want to tackle while drafting this directive. Firstly, I want to provide social safeguards for minimum energy performance standards, or MEPS, in Article 9 of the draft proposal. That will phase out our worst performing buildings while providing protection for those at risk of energy poverty. And if we can bring forward the timelines for MEPS to phase out what I would term unsafe buildings sooner, that would be a progressive step. And I think we need to give a clear timeline to businesses to ensure market preparedness in the construction sector. And this comes across all the Fit for 55 files. I was addressing the issue of sustainable aviation fuel earlier, and it's all about setting a clear trajectory that the industry have to measure up to. The more certainty we can give, the better. Secondly, obviously, I want to increase the number of solar roofs, heat pumps, and deep renovations across Europe by providing financial incentives at an EU level to member states and local authorities so that they can phase out fossil fuel dependency in housing. I mean, next week, the big Repower EU initiative will be announced, and if we can make a specific link within the EPBD text to reflect this, I think it would really help us, because I think it would allow us to fast track these technologies if we can. Thirdly, we need to mobilize financing for the renovations, in particular to support people living in energy poverty. This stuff isn't cheap. I mean, there is low-hanging fruit on it, but we've got to ramp up the finance. And from talking to some of the financial institutions like the EIB or the ECB or the Bank for Reconstruction and Development, they want to do this, but they need the legal certainty that comes from legislation. And I think once that's in place, it will help us go faster, go further faster. Green loans, green mortgages, we're seeing announcements along these lines. We need a lot more of them. And I think there are synergies within European Union and national funding in Article 15, but we've got to get private institutions on board with this as well. I mean, I did a back of an envelope calculation that in Ireland, we probably need $1 billion spent every year on renovations. At European level, maybe 100 billion. You know, pretty soon you're talking real money. And I think we have to look at this in the context of providing stable, good employment over the next 30 years at both professional, skilled worker, unskilled level. So it really has the potential to boost employment in the years ahead. I also think we need to improve the air quality, the indoor air quality of buildings, and adopt a neighbourhood approach by trying to connect renovated buildings to local renewable energy resources that can reduce our energy costs. Household air pollution is a big deal. We're finding out a lot more about it. The World Health Organization is telling us this, and we need to address it in the EPBD, because as we make our homes much more sealed, we then have to ensure that we have a minimum amount of air changes per hour. We need to do this right and make sure that the indoor air quality is good. And I think we need to include this in the energy performance certs under Article 16. I'd like to see the member states do this. Finally, I'd like the member states to be a bit more innovative when it comes to things like zero emission buildings, whole life carbon, and the new European Bauhaus. We can use design to deliver on a lot of our goals, and we heard that wonderful French architectural couple when they won the Pritzker Prize last year talk about the most sustainable building being the building we already have. the bringing whole life carbon into the mix helps us to do this. And look, I think there's a huge amount of wins from all of this. I mean, one final overlooked thing I think is the challenge of renewables being their variation, whether it be wind or solar. But if we use solar in particular within buildings to charge our mobility needs, we can start to kind of dampen down the ups and downs of the grid and use electricity when it's at its greenest. And I think there's an opportunity within the EPBD to do this. So great to see the new level of ambition coming across the political spectrum, obviously in response to the most dreadful of events. And I look forward to hearing what the others have to say.
Thank you, Kieran. Great overview. And indeed, we hope to keep very close to the process as it develops over the coming months. I now turn to Arianna Vitali, who is the Secretary General of the Coalition for Energy Savings. And Arianna, maybe you don't mind me portraying you as the expert on the Energy Efficiency Directive, because it's a core concern. And indeed, it covers also several aspects about buildings. Maybe you might give your impressions about the place of the EED within the Fit for 55 package and how it treats the buildings, or indeed react to what you're hearing already from other panelists. Arianna.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for your question, and very glad to be with you all today. Yes, of course, as Coalition for Energy Savings, we are mainly focusing on the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is the key legislation setting the overall EU framework for energy efficiency that, of course, works hand in hand with other efficiency legislation, including the recast EPBD, as you mentioned. And I think this was already mentioned by previous speakers, but I think it's really important to highlight again how energy savings achieved in the building sector are really indispensable to meet the EU 2030 energy efficiency target. And even more in the case, there is a higher energy efficiency target as the one the coalition would hope to see recommended by the REPowerEU package coming next week. And also achieving a higher target means having dedicated strong measures in the building sector to really tap this huge amount potential that is still existing. The EED, of course, I mean, as its place on in its Fit for 55 package, and when it comes to the buildings sector, it has dedicated provisions that target specifically the public sector, which is the key one to kickstart the renovation market. I think you mentioned already, but I think one of the key lessons learned from the pandemic is that all buildings that provide a public service to citizens, our schools, our hospitals, our nursing homes, matter. They matter for the individual as they improve their comfort, but also they matter because they are a part of the social infrastructure, and that's why they need really to be renovated. Also, I think in the light of the urgency to reduce fossil fuel imports from Russia, already mentioned, I think public buildings, including with the provisions in the EPBD, really need to open the way to a fully efficient and renewable-based building stock as soon as possible. So in this sense, I think we were quite pleased as the coalition with the original Commission proposal to recast the building provision, because they extended the scope of the obligation to buildings that were owned by public bodies, not just those that are occupied by central governments, as it is currently in the case in the current ED. We were happy to see that there is this idea of moving away from shallow renovation, but requiring public buildings to be renovated at net ZEP standards. That's really determinant to ensure the high level of ambition. And also we are happy to see that there was a deletion of alternative approach that member states are using now, for example, to achieve this provision with other measures that have nothing to do with the renovation, like, for example, information campaigns. So I think all in all, we are also very much concerned that we are seeing the Council of the EU in its discussion on the Energy Efficiency Directive that is trying really to weaken very much this proposal. And they hope that this will not go farther, especially, as I said, because of the key role that public buildings have to play. One final point, and this is my final one I want to make actually, is that there is also another very important provision in the Energy Efficiency Directive that while this is cross-sectoral, has driven building renovation, and is the article on the energy savings obligation, the current Article 7, the famous the recast Article 8, that requires a member state to achieve every year an annual end-use energy saving objective. So this provision, with the measures that are put in place, can drive building renovation. We have seen that in the current proposal, the annual objective is increased from 0.8 to 1.5%. Very positively, the rapporteur in ITRE, Mr. Forsgang, also proposed to increase up this obligation to 2%, and this, I think, is a clear way to increase building renovation because it's a clear vehicle for financing. Also, more importantly, and this is my last point, the recast Article 8 really introduced a requirement for a certain share of these savings to be achieved with measures targeting people affected by energy poverty, vulnerable consumers, and people living in social housing. So as we know that many of those people in this target group live in the worst performing buildings, we really hope to see this proposal kept, because this would also ensure that the ED delivers on building renovation also for those that cannot afford them. So I think that's really another crucial point that we need to safeguard to ensure that the energy efficiency can lead to a more affordable energy Fit for 55 package. And I'm looking forward to the debate with the others.
Thank you, Ariana. Indeed, the ED is seen by us as a crucial directive, and our infographic picks up on precisely that point about energy poverty being covered specifically in Article 8. But it's also covered in the Renewables Directive and in the Buildings Directive itself, of course, as you'll see when you can examine our infographic. So I turn to our last panelist, Femke. Thank you for joining us from the European Climate Foundation. And before I give you the floor, I just remind the audience to put your questions into the chat box so my team can transmit them to me. If not, I will animate an exchange between the panelists. And Femke, you have a great deal of knowledge on decarbonisation and some of what I would call the flanking elements to buildings within the Fit for 55 package. Over to you for a 2 to 3 minute statement.
Yes, thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for the invitation to join this very interesting webinar. I just wanted to show, for those who have not seen, some of the results from a research project by Cambridge Econometrics that looked into the socio-economic impacts of decarbonizing buildings. And it found that doing so, and thereby also cutting the use of Russian energy imports for home heating, that provides numerous benefits for Europe's society. And this includes many thousands of new jobs, a boost to Europe's GDP, reduced energy bills, and an increased disposable incomes for the poorest households. And in this context, maybe also important to note that the study found that there's a clear connection between the deployment of heat pumps, either as individual solutions or in district heating systems, and the socio-economic benefits in this scenario. So the greater the uptake of heat pumps as opposed to hydrogen boilers, the greater the socio-economic benefits. But obviously this transition will not happen automatically, and we need indeed dedicated policies and financing measures to accelerate the reduction of fossil fuel consumption in buildings. And I would like to highlight in particular one policy instrument that was already briefly touched upon by Brian, that is arguably one of the most energy efficiency instruments that Europe has, but often overlooked in debates like this one, and that is eco-design. According to the Commission, last year alone, the current eco-design measure saved EU consumers 120 billion euros in energy expenditure. And by 2030, the Sustainable Products Framework can lead to energy savings equal to the EU's imports of Russian gas. So this is a very important policy tool that we have. And as the world's largest single market and a global standard setters, this EU product policy represents a tremendous opportunity to create mass markets for clean solutions. And I'm not sure if it was mentioned in your infographic, Adrian, but I think it's an important policy instrument. It needs to get a much more prominent place in the political discussions. Also, for example, to ensure that the eco-design measures are brought in line with, for example, the EPBD objective of phasing out fossil heating by 2040. I also have a next slide, which is another study that will be launched this Thursday by the IECP that shows that the European Green Deal, and in particular the renovation wave, could deliver a fairer society and alleviate energy poverty by ensuring that the most vulnerable in particular have access to clean, affordable heating and live in energy efficient homes. And the study found that the combination of minimum energy performance standards to upgrade buildings, a phase out of the sale of fossil boilers, and this combined with a smart recycling of carbon pricing revenues can achieve these outcomes. And introducing all of these three policies together will result in the lowest energy costs and the highest disposable incomes of low-income households, comparing to only introducing one or two of these policies. But I think the problem is that this is at the moment not happening under the proposed Fit for 55 policies. And there have been no policies proposed to phase out the sale of fossil boilers, for example. And this could pose a risk of stranded assets, for example, for consumers, specifically in the 2040s when the ETS2 cap reaches zero. Maybe to explain a little bit, under the proposed new emissions trading system for buildings, from 2044, the use of gas for home heating is in principle no longer possible. But alongside this, there are no policies to phase out the sale of the least efficient heating appliances, such as gas boilers, under eco-design or the EPBD. And this could lead to a situation in which gas boilers continue being sold, even though they will become more and more expensive to run, even more expensive than today, due to the ETS2 price and developments in energy prices. And these kind of inconsistencies now need to be addressed by policymakers. And listening to Kieran, I hear that they will be addressed possibly as part of the EPBD. Not only because this can help reduce Russian gas imports, but it can also help ensure that Europe and all of its citizens can reap all of these socio-economic benefits of the transition to zero carbon homes. And perhaps also to mention that eco-design not only regulates the energy efficiency of products, but also emission pollutants levels. So for example, Kieran Cuff mentioned indoor air quality of buildings. Product policy can also play an important role in that. And there is perhaps an opportunity as well to set emission limits, for example, for cooking appliances, with gas cooking appliances being a very important contributor to asthma, particularly in children. And this is something that is under discussion in the coming months, and these kind of product policies can really help deliver multiple benefits on different levels. Thanks, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Femke. And indeed, the eco-design being a topic that EuroACE doesn't address directly, but we're aware of it. It has indeed delivered great savings over the years that we are aware of. But thank you for helping, I think, to demonstrate to the audience the complexity of the buildings sector as a sector that needs to be regulated, and how many issues get covered just by thinking about quality and energy performance of buildings. Time, of course, always runs, but I see a question that has come in that I will address in a moment. But Brian, did you wish to react to anything that you've heard, or give another pearl of wisdom like the tree planting pearl of wisdom, which impressed me earlier?
I'm on a one pearl a day diet, Adrian. Let me make two very quick points. Reacting to the colleagues, I think it's great to hear the depth of this discussion and the level of ambition. My first point is we talk to governments all over the world about energy efficiency policy, how they can move faster, what their goals are. And when I think about the kind of twin goals here of higher ambition and stronger implementation, I tend to find that governments understand that efficiency has more to give, and the barrier is not a belief in the value or the benefits of energy efficiency, but it's more the how, which you said at the very start, Adrian. They're not sure what policies will work. They're not sure which policy to start with, which sector to start with, and to be frank, they're sometimes skeptical because they've tried various things in the past and they haven't delivered what they thought they would deliver. So I think we certainly put a focus on showing governments the solutions, what works in different countries, how to design the best policy, how to implement and follow up. And that relates to my second point, which is 2 years ago, we published the recommendations of the Global Commission for Urgent Action on Energy Efficiency. And this involved a lot of energy ministers and other leading thinkers publishing 10 key recommendations for faster action, in a very practical way. And their first and top recommendation was you really need a whole of government approach to energy efficiency. Energy ministries don't have the power to control what happens in the building sector or the transport sector or the education sector. And I think it's fair to say that over the decades, energy efficiency probably hasn't been sexy enough or urgent enough to drive a really strong whole of government priority approach. But two things have happened that change that. One, of course, is the focus on net zero. We have heads of state all over the world in the last year saying, my government, my country is really going to push for net zero. It's a whole of government platform. And suddenly energy efficiency has a standing it didn't have before. And secondly, in the last few months, in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, energy security, the immediacy of energy affordability has really put the demand side energy use and energy efficiency in a place of profile and importance that it's never really been in my living memory, I must say. So the opportunities for government to really put in strong, coherent, cross-sectoral, cross-departmental responses is in the here and now. And I think the more we can do to help member states understand what they can do, what the actions are, where to start, where they can move faster, I think there's a real opportunity now to really support much, much faster, stronger than action than ever before.
Yeah, Brian, I have to agree with you. And I might turn to Paula to react to that, because Paula, I wonder, member states often complain that the European Commission is just a regulation producing machine and they can't possibly cope with all that comes out. But has the Commission considered how it can help governments see that a whole government approach that Brian has just outlined could be really important in these urgent times, which is in effect the question from the audience that I see here, where at these moments of urgency, there's been a lot of talk among ministers and governments about quick wins, but actually the real challenge is long-term deep renovations, in our case, of buildings. So I wondered, Paula, if you'd like to react and address that question of regulatory complexity and whether member states can be further helped by the Commission in implementing what's coming down the road towards them. Paula.
Yes, thank you very much. And if I may also react to some of the earlier points on the link and also the potential of eco-design and energy labeling in particular. So in fact, we really try to bring attention into this synergy as part of the explanatory memorandum for the EPBD recast, where we also highlight how eco-design and energy labeling really work hand in hand with the EPBD. And in fact, really of direct relevance to our exchange now, the review of the regulations on heating appliances, so space and water heater appliances, is ongoing and is really aiming at being in full tune with everything that we are discussing now. So that on the energy labeling side, for instance, the scaling is adjusted to put really the new efficiencies up to the standards that are needed, and this will necessarily result on rescaling also of those that are fossil fuel based. So this should have a very direct effect as everything else that comes on eco-design and energy labeling, because there we are talking about directly applicable rules. So the effect, of course, is huge. And then through the energy label is something that talks directly to citizens, because they can really act and make their choice on a rather daily basis whenever they are looking into those appliances. And linked to this, we have been also working quite hard on the April database. I don't know how much familiar you are with it. This is really the database showing the different products and under efficiencies, and this is also a very important tool for public procurement, for incentives. So for really making sure that any public incentive really targets the appliances that are on the top classes. And those will not be the ones that are for fossil fuel based. I mean, we see it already today, and it will be even more the case in the future, that those appliances that are in the top classes are really the ones that are energy efficient and renewable based. So these are certainly very powerful tools that will be even more important, you know, with the current context and the revision that is going on. And then moving at the necessity really to bring everybody at all levels to act and to be activated. I think on this there are different efforts that are going on. I mean, this was already, for instance, as part of the renovation wave, a key focus, really this addressing all the levels of government on the one hand, but also engaging citizens and bringing also the private sector in. And it's similarly part of the reflections that we are now doing for the REPower package, the announcement on actions in particular on savings. And here as well, we would really like to see this effort across the board. So these efforts on the governance side. At this stage, we have been floating different ideas. Of course, we want to build very much on what is already there. So for instance, the concerted actions for the EPBD, the ED and the Renewables Directive have been extremely useful for engaging member states, but there are many other vehicles, let's say, being with the Covenant of Measures, with the city's mission that is taking more and more shape, with the new European Bauhaus. I mean, there are many already vehicles that could be activated for additional efforts, and also for bringing the private sector in. So for instance, with financial institutions, we have already very strong dialogue in place through the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group. This could be further reinforced. I mean, we are already working in that direction, but whether and how this will also be supported by concrete actions in the package of next week, I could not tell at this point, because all this is still very much under discussion. But really a big objective on our side is certainly to support from the Commission side all this additional mobilization at every level.
Thank you, Paula. And turning to Kieran, you spent a stint in national government, and I was worried by what Ariana said, that the member states in the negotiations on the EED are already trying to weaken some of the provisions. Are you afraid this might happen for the Buildings Directive? Because with your progressive rapporteurs, shadow rapporteurs, you will be coming forward with additional effort requirements from the member states. And what's your reaction to the whole government concept that Brian mentioned? And then I'll quickly turn to Ariana and Femke for last comments. Kieran.
Thanks, Adrian. Yes, I am worried, and I think there's always a danger that the legislative proposals will be diminished by some member states that haven't shown the same enthusiasm for greenhouse gas reductions than others. It's got to be remembered that we are bringing member states on a very swift journey from coal, past oil, past gas, to renewables, to energy storage. We're bringing people a very long distance very quickly. And I think some countries are still absorbing the energy impacts of what's happening in Ukraine. But I think they have to be on a fast learning curve to realize that the impact of being very dependent on fossil fuels from Russia is deeply problematic. So I think there is an exercise in communication. I think we have to bring member states on board. We have to show what is being done currently by progressive member states. But some countries have a much longer distance to travel than others. The other thing that worries me is the bottlenecks, and some of those are supply chains, some of those are elsewhere. I mean, for instance, the issue of upskilling and education. Each member state has a very different approach to this. Some have been installing solar panels, by the bucket load for decades, and others have barely done any, and some of those are located exactly where solar energy is most abundant. But that's one example of kind of a bottleneck, the supply chains. But there are other bottlenecks in terms of regulatory consent. We're battling with some of them in my own country of Ireland, but I think each member state has to not just look at the incorporation of the Fit for 55 package into their own domestic legislation. They have to look at the obstacles that they face within their own planning consents, for instance. And Frans Timmermans was talking last week about the challenge of both protecting biodiversity and dramatically ramping up renewables. So there may well be other European legislation that we need to look at quite carefully to ensure that we can deliver the kind of ambition that we want to, assuming, of course, that we get the member states on board as well.
Great, Kieran. Thanks for those reflections. Femke, a few last reflections, and then we'll come to Ariana before we wrap up.
I'm not sure what else I can add. Maybe just to say that I think it is great to have this webinar that looks at how to mobilize a Fit for 55 package to decarbonize building and make sure that it is coherent and consistent. And I think indeed the focus should not only be on one policy instrument or making something more expensive, but looking also at how can we bring citizens along and make sure that the solutions are accessible and affordable and attractive to people. And I think making sure that these objectives and the different instruments are consistent and all point into the same direction, that not only helps us meet our climate target, but also brings all these benefits and reduces our reliance on energy imports. I think that is very important. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Femke. Ariana. Muted.
I'm muted. So my last word, just to say that, I mean, thanks again for this interesting event focusing on the Fit for 55. But as a matter of fact, I mean, I hate to say that, but in a certain sense, the Fit for 55 is almost outdated, considering the situation we are in with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, of course, we are all looking at the Repower EU package coming up on the 18th of May to see what actually the European Commission is proposing member states to do on top of 54-55 and what the Commission is also suggesting, not just to solve the short-term emergency, but as Brian just mentioned, to align the answer to long-term objectives, namely from the point of view of energy efficiency, ensuring that the trees that we are planting today for energy efficiency it can really deliver in 10 years from now, meaning we need to grasp the short-term savings, but really we need to include them in a longer-term vision to reduce structurally energy use in Europe. So I think in that respect, we would really hope to see, even from the Commission, stronger provision on the ED and also even on the EPBD to align this new directive to the changing geopolitical situation. So that's, I think, my last word. Fit for 55 is really not the end of the game, and we need to look for more as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you to all the panelists. It's been a really rich presentation of views and opinions, and it's a real pleasure to pass over to my president, Céline Carré, who will now do the difficult job of wrapping up and drawing some conclusions from the complex discussion we've had. So once again, thanks to the panelists, and over to you, Céline.
Yes, thanks, Adrian. Seeing time, I'll be very short. I would like to thank all of our panelists for this great discussion. It is needed to exchange on all of this topic at this moment in time. I would like to underline maybe three things. I recognize first a very strong momentum for action on energy efficiency in buildings. It's an unambiguous and compelling momentum for action. We meet decarbonisation of buildings with a deeper societal consensus with those topics. And it's also a momentum where energy security meets the peacemaking ambition that is at the core of the European project. So this is very strong. Second point, also from the perspective of EuroACE members, is that there is a formidable commitment to action. We can do it. We can do it better than 10 years ago, even if we should have acted stronger 10 years ago. Now we can go faster. Renovation has enjoyed great focus under the Recovery and Resilience Plan. Renovate Flagship is there to accelerate as well, and we have the solutions. We have better solutions to deeply retrofit buildings in all segments. We can better map potentials. We have digital technologies, and there is also this great potential for new job. So all in all, since we have this momentum and we can do it, I have a special ask to all the decision makers that are listening to us. Is that it's a call to commit to make it work, to make this Fit for 55 work for buildings, and to not shy away from ambition. It's energy efficiency is for now. It's a solution for now, be it in the Fit for 55 or in the Repower EU. It's not something for mañana. It's for today. It's for now. And it's also my call to align with the different pieces of legislation. The best way to align between all of them is to consider this priority on buildings to help investment certainty, to help what we have mentioned today, market preparedness, to triple renovation rate, to also mobilize better finance, and also to signal to younger generation that it's a great project to jump on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Céline. And thanks to the audience for staying with us. And with that, thank you and have a good rest of the day. The recording will be up in a couple of days' time for those that want to hear all those great ideas again. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Adrian. Bye.
Welcome.